I'm Kaus Trutzel. I was born in Neustadt an der Weinstraße, and my birth date is 21st of April 1937. My mother is Elisabeth Charlotte, called Lieselotte Krebs, and she married my father, Hermann Trutzel, and then before she died she was married to Ruprecht Grünenwald. She was born on the 20th of September 1913, and my father was born on the 28th of June 1909. They were both born in Neustadt.
Good. How about your grandparents?
My father's mother, I don't know when she was born, but she died in the 1950s. And I didn't know my grandfather, my father's father. He died in 1934. He was working for the Bavarian Railway Company, and he died of cancer of the throat. I think he smoked cigars.
I see.
It was bad for him.
He must have been pretty young.
Yes, well, not so very young, but he must have been 50 or between 50 and 60. At that time, people died earlier.
Yeah.
On my mother's side, there is Grandpa Johann Krebs, or Jean Krebs. He died in 1961, and I think he was about 80 at that time. His wife, my mother's mother, she died in 1923, I think. In any case, early 20s. And she died of tuberculosis, because at that time, after the First World War, people were very poor and lots of people died of tuberculosis, just as my mother's brother, August, he also died of tuberculosis, just before he got his master's in craftsmanship of wood carving.
What kind of work did your grandfather do?
He was a wood carver too, and he owned a little wholesale business in plywood and a bit of veneer and all kinds of little bits of wood. It was not a big business, and his original business was wood carving and, I don't know what you call this, drilling or making smooth, nice big plates of wood, and also chess figures, all kinds of things that you can drill. And he lost practically, I would say practically all his fingers, one after the other, because before you carve the wood, you cut it out a bit so that you don't have to chisel too much away. And so some of his fingers were all off, and some were half off, and some were just a little bit off. And I think in the end he just could not hold the tools. So his partner in the business, Herr Kruppenbacher, he did most of the carving.
What was the address where the business was located?
That was Rittergartenstraße number 6. That was close to Rathausstraße, where apparently the Schlindwein family, that's my mother's side, Schlindwein family, came from, and also my grandfather's mother lived. That was also in Rathausstraße, only a few houses apart from the others.
Okay. What's the earliest thing you can remember in your life? The first recollection you have of being alive? How old were you, or what is it?
I think I must have been about 3, maybe 3 or 4. In any case, I remember that my father, who had come back for a few days from the war, took us swimming in the River Rhine. Of course, nowadays you don't swim in that river, but at that time you could do that, or at least you didn't pay any attention to all the poisoning. And I remember that he put me on his shoulders and we went into the water. Another thing, but that was already during the war, when my mother was by herself, and my brother and myself, we were allowed to be in the parents' beds in the morning, and we used to play with the torch. And we broke it under the pillow. We broke the torch, And my mother said, well, now get the stick, and we were a bit afraid of getting beaten up. So we packed our underwear. I was maybe 4 or 4.5. Packed our underwear and a few shirts just in very simple sheets of newspaper, and we went away to go across the Rhine Bridge to Mannheim, where my grandfather's sister-in-law, he married again before the war, where she lived, because we thought this was close and we would go there and she would look after us. So we packed our things and the two of us walked, and of course this newspaper, it split, and people were running after us, bringing us the lost pieces of underwear. And we got right to the middle of the Rhine Bridge, and then a policeman used his whistle and he said, "Your children are not allowed to cross the Rhine Bridge." My mother had rung him up and told him that he should send us back.
What year did you say that was?
That must have been in 41, so I was about 4 years old.
Okay.
In 42, the house got bombed and we moved to a little village west of Neustadt.
Where were you living when you told this story? Was that in Ludwigshafen? Or?
That was Ludwigshafen, yes.
I see.
So it was, say, half a mile to the Rhine Bridge and we were halfway across. Of course, at that time there was not so much traffic.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a journalist. He worked for the regional newspaper for interior and cultural affairs.
Well, what do you remember of your life, say, during the war? Did you spend much time with your grandparents or grandfather? Were you living close to him at all?
Well, we lived in that village, and of course at that time there was hardly any public transport. I still remember that we occasionally visited him from Ludwigshafen, and I remember that this train took a long time. It was only about less than 20 miles, but it took more than an hour to go from Ludwigshafen to Neustadt. And I still remember these boring trips. But then when we moved in 42, we moved to that village west of Neustadt. There we didn't have quite so much contact. There were two reasons. First of all, it was dangerous to walk in the streets because of the British and American bombers, not the right thing. The small machines with machine guns, and they would shoot people in the streets.
Fighter planes?
Yes, fighter planes. Secondly, walking 7 kilometers, say 4.5 miles, was quite a long way for children, so we didn't walk that distance very often. But also, they didn't have much to eat, and we didn't have much to eat, so it was always a bit of hesitation visiting somebody, because we knew we would be welcome, but it would be difficult for them to feed us, so we didn't go very often until after the war.
So would you say you were short of food, or you mean...
Not during the war, soon at the end of the war.
At
the end of the war, and until about 1948, it was really difficult. And of course, living in a village was a bit easier, but that was a village in the woods, not in the fields. So there were just a few fields with potatoes, and we would go out at night and steal potatoes or collect mushrooms in the woods and berries.
That's why you're such a mushroom expert, huh?
I'm not a real expert. And for about, I would say, 20 years, I would not eat mushrooms anymore.
Oh, yeah?
And now I really like them again.
Let's see, you were 5 years old about this time?
Yes.
So, how about school, when it was time to go to the first grade? Did you have school?
First grade, we start school at 6.
Yeah.
So you have to register to go to school first. And I was registered in Ludwigshafen, and then we had the air raids, and we moved to that village called Frankenegg. And there was a proper school, and I went to that school, and there were 4 different grades in the same classroom. And so it was a bit difficult for that teacher to teach us all. So he had one group were just trying to start reading or writing, and the other group was already more advanced. But I apparently was the only one who could write, who could read this old writing. We had this old-fashioned script, yes. And I was able to read, and I had to read to the class, which I did not like. And that school got bombed also. And unfortunately, all our good furniture was stored in the attic of that school. And as it was bombed, it was really damaged a bit. And the worst damage was really caused by the American troops coming in, because the cupboards were locked and they just broke them open to find things, valuable things. So.
During the war, did your mother have a job?
Not during the war, no. My mother got kind of pension, and money was not the problem. Of course, we didn't have much, but we survived. So. And after the war, about 48, I think, she tried to find a job, because then, of course, money wasn't worth anything. And that was in Neustadt again. So we tried to move to Neustadt, and in 48 we moved there, and we lived in a kind of kiosk next to the high school. And we stayed there for 3 years. I liked that time. I still remember it.
I know it was, I didn't see it, but I saw pictures of it. Very small.
Yes, and Nancy and your mother visited us there.
How about your grandfather? Did he run his business during the war also? Was it functional?
Yes, I think he still ran the business, but not on a big scale, because it was difficult to get the things in, and there were not many people who would be able to buy things, because all the men were in the war. So business was really very, very modest at that time. But he kept going, and he still had this business until, I would say, 55 or so. And then he had to give up. But he would not let my mother take over, and at least as long as he thought he could run it himself. And so my mother started her own business. Oh, that was earlier. My mother started her own business in 1950.
I see.
In the same trade.
Did you ever work at your grandfather's business or your mother's business?
Well, I didn't really work with my grandfathers, but he allowed us to distribute the mail. And so we got the money that would have been spent on stamps. And that was quite nice. Little bit of money, extra money, because our pocket money was not very much at that time. And in my mother's business, yes, I worked practically all the holidays, and I enjoyed it.
You worked on what days?
Holidays, during my sort of summer holidays, I would work there.
In other words, you worked when you were not in school, is that what you're saying?
But not during school.
So in well, let's see, how long did you go to school at that school that got bombed? What happened when it got bombed? Did you...
Well, when it got bombed, the teacher tried to teach us in one of those, not a cellar, I don't know what you'd call it. They had dug a tunnel through the mountain just as a shelter. And people would go into that tunnel and wait till the air raid was over. And the teacher tried for a few weeks to teach us there, and then we just gave up. So maybe for 1 year or so I didn't go to school at all. And then after we moved to Neustadt, I went to school again. And I stayed in the primary school 1 year longer, because I had missed 1 year. I regret this, but at that time people thought this was the best way to do it. Then I got into the what we call grammar school, high school, and I stayed there for 4 years. And then we didn't know whether we would be able to afford the money that was needed to pay for someone who did not work. And I decided to go to a kind of, we call it Handelsschule, commercial school. There you learn a bit of bookkeeping and so on. But that school was good enough. It also taught foreign languages. So as my report was satisfactory, I could go on into high school and until I got the, what do you call this, baccalaureate or abitur.
Yeah.
That's the
Graduation.
Yes, graduation
Yeah.
from high school.
What year did you start high school? 1955 or 4? Or?
1951.
Okay.
Yes. Because after the primary school we can go to high school. After the 4th grade in primary school we can go to grammar school or high school.
I see.
And I stayed there for 9 years altogether. So it was 4 years there, 2 years in that commercial school, another 3 years after that.
So that's 15 years of school. 13
So
with the normal school and 2 more years for the commercial school.
15 years, yes, 15 years altogether.
What did you do after you graduated from the commercial school?
I stayed in that same place. That commercial school was in Mannheim. That's about 20 miles from Neustadt. I used to go there by train and streetcar across the Rhine Bridge again. And that school that I went on was in the same building. So it was just sort of continuing, really. And after that, I started studying economics in Munich. I stayed there for 2 years, I think. Then I spent 1 year in England, in London, at the London School of Economics. Came back and graduated after the 9th semester. Then I started at a market research institute in Munich. I did that for 2 years.
So in Munich, you lived in Munich.
Yes.
Did you live with a family or in a dormitory or what?
No, not a dormitory. Those were all sort of blocked. There's too many people applied, and so I lived with a family. There was people my stepfather knew, and with that family I could stay. I had a little room there, and I could use the same bathroom, and yes, that was quite nice. And I had a little car at that time, a 300 cubic centimeter go-go mobile. Yes, a very small thing, but it was efficient, and I could use it for going to the university because they lived in a village outside Munich.
I see.
I also had this car in London, and of course it was red, and I parked it right in front of the university. Everybody envied me for having this thing, and I lived on so little money. I was really just...
Was the school free in Munich? Did you have to pay?
In Munich you had to pay, but not very
much.
No. In London I think I also had to pay, but not much. It was very little, and I was very economical. I ate very sort of set cheap meals, and there was a cafeteria, and I could use that. And that go-go mobile only took very, very, very little gasoline.
Okay, I'm going to recognize my wife, Margarita. Hello.
Hello.
Anything to say?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, Klaus, let's see, tell us about, do you have children?
Yes, I have one daughter. That's Claudia, and she is daughter also of my first wife. I was married to Linda Johnson, and we got married in 1962. 6th of June 1962, I think. And I met her in Neustadt, actually, because I had an English pen friend, and that pen friend brought Linda with her, and she had spent several holidays with us, and eventually we thought we would try and wait and perhaps get married. And then she went back again to England, and I was in Munich studying and also went to England, and then we decided we would get married. And we got married in England, actually, but after I had finished studying. That was great. occasion.
Did your mother and your grandfather
Yes.
go? No, your
No, the
grandfather was
grandfather,
dead.
no.
Yeah.
Grandfather was already dead.
Yeah.
He had already died while I was studying in Munich. But my mother and Rup went. My two friends from school also came with us, and
Rolf?
Rolf, yes, Rolf
Yeah.
and his wife.
Oh, he was married at the time?
Yes, he married before me.
Oh, he got married young, didn't he?
Yes, yes. Well, he didn't study, so he couldn't get married earlier. In Munich, I worked for a market research institute, and that was in the west of Munich. And we found an apartment also west of Munich in a village, which now belongs to Munich. And I traveled to work by car, and that still was this tiny little go-go mobile that I had already had in England. And I didn't sell it until we moved to Nuremberg. So this car really lasted at least 8 or 10 years, I think. In Munich, Claudia was born. She was also born in 1963. She was born in that village next to Munich. And after 2 years, I decided that work at that market research institute was not quite so interesting as I thought. I was responsible for drawing these random samples, and there were orders one after the other, and you could not build on to what you had done the years and months before. So after a while, it kept being the same kind of work, and I decided I would want to go away. So my professor, statistics professor, he recommended me to go to Nuremberg. And so I did. I applied, and my late boss, who was later my boss, he spent a holiday on the lake near Munich, and he asked me to visit him there. And I had a long interview, 2 or 3 hours, and he said, yes, okay, I should start with him. And so on the 1st of January, I started in Nuremberg, and that was in a group that had been started just a few months before doing urban research. It was a group attached to the planning and building department, but as this group needed data, it had to be integrated into the statistical bureau that already existed. So when I started, this group was just joining the statistical bureau, so I became head of a small department on urban research, and in that position I stayed until 1974. And that boss I had then, he moved to Hamburg. He became head of the State Statistical Bureau of the city of Hamburg. And I got a new boss. He was a statistician, but he was not so very much interested in practical work. So I did practically all the work that had to be done in that office, as far as research is concerned. And in 1974 he retired, and I became his successor. In the meantime, I was responsible for building up work group on city development, and we started that, and that group lasted until the middle of the 90s, although I already left that group in 1974. But they still were in the same building, and we had very close cooperation, which was good for the Statistical Bureau and for them, because they had the data and we had the demand. Well, and now I'm just before retiring. I married again in 1974. At that time I bought this house, in which we are now, in Josef-Simon-Straße 18, in the south of Nuremberg, close to the Autobahn, so we can go into the Autobahn to Neustadt very quickly, and also close to the Autobahn to Munich, because I always liked skiing, and this was important for me, although I really only go once per year and not more often. I had hoped to go more often, but I didn't. And, yeah.
How about, you have grandchildren, right?
Yes. My daughter Claudia, she married a kind of missionary. Martin had studied mathematics first, and then he decided this wasn't the right thing for him, and he then studied theology and became a missionary, and Claudia married him in, I think, about 87, I think, in 87. And now they have 5 children. The eldest is Samuel, the next is Peter, then Andrew, then Daniel, and the last one, I don't know the name. That's Jonathan. Yes, Jonathan. That doesn't come. I've decided I will call him John because Jonathan is really not to be pronounced.
That's the same name as Lisa. Nancy's daughter Lisa has her last son is Jonathan also. Yeah.
Well, it's perhaps more British. Here it's so old-fashioned that nobody would use it. Yeah. We only know of Jonathan in the Bible, and is that the one who was in the whale, I think? No, yeah. Wasn't it? Jonathan and the whale? Jonas. Yeah, well, perhaps it's the same. I don't know.
Back in the days of the war, your mom had one time talked about how frightening it was when you're being bombed. And I think she said that she remembered holding you and Rolf between her legs to protect you from the buildings.
Well, yes. I think it was not so much at that time, it was a few months later, but when she was really frightened. At that time, there were the alarms, and most people would go into the cellars. The first few times my mother didn't go, and then when the house really started shaking, we went down, and we spent the rest of the night down there in the cellar with all the other people. And one day, of course, the houses on the other side of the road got bombed, and I still remember everything in flames and very hot all around. And a few days later, our house got bombed. Not so badly that everything was destroyed, just the front wall would come in, and of course nobody was allowed to live in that house anymore. But we could take away most of the furniture, and we were evacuated to that village that I mentioned already. The occasion when I think my mother was frightened was when we visited friends, also in Ludwigshafen, but in another part of the town. And there was another air raid, and we went down into a cellar. But that cellar was not very deep, and we sat close to the entrance, and you could see daylight looking out, and phosphorus would run down the stairs, you see. And then my mother suddenly grabbed me and pulled me away because I was standing in the blood of a little girl who had been killed. So, as I was very young, this did not impress me very much, so I cannot say I was shocked by the war. But, and even when we lived in the village, I just didn't believe that you could get killed through those fighter planes. But everybody else said it's dangerous, so we all jumped into the ditch when these planes arrived.
Did Rolf hang around with you during these times? Was he always with you as your younger brother?
Oh yes, he was mostly with me. Although I was more someone who would sit at home and read and play at home, whereas he had lots of friends and would go around and stay outside. But as we lived in the woods, we all had lots of opportunities to play in the woods, and we dug a little sort of cellar, so to speak, and we covered it with branches, and that was our home then during the day, and in the evenings we came home.
How about your dad? He was drafted into the army, is that correct?
as far as I know, he did a voluntary service, really.
Oh.
They came around and they said, from this office, at least half of the people working here have to go. And what my mother told me and what other people said he didn't want to go first. But then there was another person working there who had, I think, 4 or 5 children. And he decided he would go rather than the father of these many children. I don't know if that is true. In any case, he went in 1939 already. And I think he also went to Poland and came back for a short while. And then when the war against Russia started, he was then drafted and had to go straight away. So he spent maybe 1 week or even less at home in between.
Do you remember seeing him then?
I only remember that it was unusual that the bedroom door was closed and and then my mother slept long and late. Normally she would be up much before we got up, but I remember that one day they were still in bed, and then we went in and also sat in that bed and had fun with father and mother.
So, did you say he went to Russia then? No.
At first to Poland,
Yeah.
and then to Russia. At least that's what I think.
After the furlough, when he was home with your mother, he then went to Russia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that where he was killed?
Yes. He was killed in Stalingrad. At least we think he was killed in Stalingrad. He was missing for many, many years. And we had no precise information. Someone reported that he was wounded, but then that person was wounded so badly that he was taken out, and he was lucky to be able to get into one of those planes, and apparently he survived that way. But my father had to stay, and because his wounds weren't so bad, or perhaps the plane was full. In any case, he had to stay, and he died in Stalingrad.
Do you have any letters that he had written to your mom?
He wrote a lot of letters because it was easy for him to write as a journalist. And I do not understand this, but my mother threw all these letters away maybe 10 years ago without asking my brother or asking me. And I was so mad at her, but of course you can't blame her. She thought nobody wants to know it. I would have wanted to read those letters. And I just didn't sort of ask her to give me the letters before, because I thought they are safe there, and perhaps she doesn't want me to read them while she's still alive. I don't know. In any case, I thought they were safe and I would get them afterwards, but she had thrown them away. So this is really maddening.
Yeah. Do you recall going to the garden with your grandfather or your mother and Ralph?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the garden?
Yes.
Anything you remember?
Yes, we lived in that kiosk next to the high school. That high school is halfway up the mountain. And in the same height, but a little bit further east, there was this big garden, a really big garden. And there were lots of fruit trees, mainly cherry trees, but also apples and plums in that garden. And at the top of the garden, there were these chestnut trees outside the garden, because all the woods there are covered with chestnut trees that you can eat. And my mother would take us up on top of the cherry trees, really big cherry trees, and she had a rope with her, and she said, you have to lose your fright of being high up in a tree. Boys have to be brave, and so she took us up. And we didn't mind. We would sit there and eat cherries. A very high ladder, and usually Opa, our grandfather, he had to fix 2 ladders sort of on top of each other, so that he would reach up to the top of that mountain. So it was really high, and it needed 2 or 3 people to put up that ladder. Opa would stand, no, somebody would have to stand on the bottom rung, and he would sort of go up one after the other, see, and sort of lift it up like that, very gradually. And then when it was vertical, he could move it a bit. And he had to be very careful to get just in the right place between the branches so that this ladder would lean against the strong branch. And so we would go right to the top, sit there and eat cherries.
What other kind of fruit trees were there?
Apple and plum, I think.
That's
and
it.
also, of course, gooseberries and red currant, black currant. Sometimes a few strawberries, but they were rare, and so we didn't eat many of those.
What happened to that property? Did he sell it or what?
Without telling us, he sold that thing at a price of 6,000 marks. That is $3,000. And I'm sure it was at least, I would say, 10,000 square feet or something like that. It was a really big piece of land. And now there are 4 or 5 houses, blocks of flats built on this ground.
I see.
So it's really would have been worth at least 10 times. But I wouldn't have been interested in the money so much. I would have liked to have this garden and perhaps build just one house in there and have a big garden. But he sold it because he didn't want to ask us for money. Perhaps he needed it, and so he sold it and lived on this.
Was he retired at the time?
Oh yes, at that time he was retired. It was maybe in 58 or 59, so just before he died.
I don't think he had a whole lot of money.
No.
Because I know that we have still at home the inheritance that my mother got from him. And she used some of that money to help start the hardware store. Or maybe they improved it. I'm not sure exactly the sequence of events. But I know when she died and we did the estate, the accountant that she hired, who was a friend of mine, he wanted to prove that my mother had put more money in than my father. Because my father died first, is what it is. I was talking about my dad's estate. And so that helped save taxes. So, well, what else?
You know, but I'm interested in the personal things. Like, how old were you when you knew that you had a cousin, you know, that was so close to your age that lived in the United States?
Well, I knew it all the time. I mean, once you start thinking, you are informed about family relations. And Peter and Nancy and Tante Olga, they were in Germany until very late, just before the war started. And so they were also in our house. Yes, they visited us also. So I knew that.
And you played together?
No.
I can't.
He was only 2 years old. I was 6 years old.
So you don't play.
Do you remember that though?
No, I don't remember. I just know it from the pictures, and also I knew it from what my mother told us. And after the war, Pete's mother sent us parcels, and we lived on that. Especially the Sprite fat, which was very useful. We didn't have any fat at that time. And then there was this dried milk, and I always liked this dried milk. When mother was out, my brother and I would sort of eat a bit of that dried milk.
Just like that?
Yes, oh yes.
You mean without mixing it?
Oh, we didn't mix it with anything.
You just ate it with rice?
Did you ever go back to the place where your mother and dad were living when I guess, were you born in that house in 1939? Is it the same place?
No, I was born in a place close to our grandfather's home, only about 100 feet away, or perhaps 200 feet away. And that building still exists, but in the beautiful garden there is now a car park, because next to it is that store where you can buy all kinds of things.
The parking lot.
Yeah, the parking lot is.
Oh, well, the house directly adjacent to the parking lot is the family house, isn't that Rittergartenstrasse?
Yes, that's also Rittergartenstrasse, but it's on the other side of the road, and it has a beautiful, still a beautiful cast. To say now, iron. What a smith? What does a smith do with iron? In any case, he made beautiful.
Forged the gates. And
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The wrought iron.
Yes, wrought iron.
Yeah.
That's the expression, and that's still there.
I see.
Inside is a parking lot, but the building, I think they use it for youth clubs now.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in the top floor of that building.
I think I remember being in your house, wherever that was when I was in Germany.
That was Ludwigshafen.
Ludwigshafen.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me you lived about like on the second or third floor. Does that?
Second floor.
Okay.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I remember my cousin August Maas made an airplane, a model airplane.
Yes.
And he showed me how to fly it.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to your house, and my mother said to, I don't know who the person was, another person, why don't you fly that plane for Peter? And I tried to explain to my mother and to this other man that how you do it. You have to throw the plane down, then it lifts up. Mm-hmm. But they told me, no, you have to throw it up.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, they did that, and it went up and straight down and crashed and broke. And I was crying. I was really angry. Mm-hmm. And so I went down real quick, picked the plane up, told everybody to get away, and I grabbed it and went through a door, and just for spite, as I went through the door, the plane hit the wall and broke even further,
Yeah.
And I was making this case against them that they weren't doing what August had said. Mm-hmm. And then the other, I guess he was a boy, just older. Mm-hmm. He said, well, he broke most of it when he hit the door. And I ignored that comment. But
he said you broke most of it.
I broke most of it.
Hitting the door.
Yeah. That was, I remember being at your house, and you had gas masks there.
Yes.
And I remember trying the gas mask on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we sometimes had to wear these gas masks because of the phosphorus that they used, I think.
Did they use that early in the war? I didn't know.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But of course we didn't wear them all the time. Once we could be sure that it wasn't dangerous, then we took them off again.
Yeah.
So actually you came to Germany during...
No, before. Before the war.
Before the war.
Yeah. We were there.
They were using phosphorus?
No, that's after I left.
Yeah, but he said that there were masks there that were used for the phosphorus.
Prior to the war, Germany had already gone into Austria and Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and whatever. So they were already, there was war vehicles around, there were tanks in the town square.
And what was the phosphorus used for?
Well, to kill people.
They're bombs, but they're fire bombs.
Yeah.
So actually you came during, when the war had already started in Europe, but you came in 1939.
We came in the summer of 1939, and the war didn't officially start as we see it until September 1st, when Germany invaded Poland.
And you left?
We left. We were supposed to leave in September, later in September.
Yes.
And maybe you know the story. Your father, he said something to my mother that I think you should leave now, that I believe there's going to be a war. Yes. I don't know the exact words. And I think between your mother and your father, they contacted the boat lines, the ocean liner, and we were able to change with someone else who wanted to stay longer.
Yeah.
So
we were lucky. No?
Yeah, we were lucky to go home.
Otherwise, you would have stayed in Germany.
Yes.
At the end of the war.
That's right. Yeah. It's interesting, when I was visiting Trutzel 2 or 3 trips ago, they had a flea market there.
Yes.
And I was looking at things they were selling, and they had some old war things. And I spoke to the person, and I asked him about himself a little bit.
Yes.
And he says, "Oh, I'm an American." He said, "We came to Germany in 1939, and we never left." But he continued. He was German. He considered himself German, but born in America.
Mm-hmm.
And not 10 minutes later, I ran into another person. The same exact thing happened. He came to Germany in September of 1939. No, he was there in September from earlier. Yeah, and the same situation. And one of them lived right next door to Dieter and Trudel. They didn't know that.
Were they of German ancestry?
Oh, I'm sure, because they were visiting family, yeah.
Imagine how history would have changed for you had you stayed 2 more weeks.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it would be, but fortunately, probably would have been in Kirweiler, and there would be no harm done to me. But it would be quite a difference, sure. Yeah. I wouldn't have met you.
Right.